Billionaire refused to believe in love until a poor girl proved him wrong. He built empires and buried emotions a billionaire too broken to love again. But when a girl with paint-stained hands stepped into his world, everything he believed about love began to crumble. Hey friends, please subscribe to help this world of love stories grow. Comment on your country so we can see where our family of hearts comes from. Your support spreads warmth, faith, and romance even further. Together, we keep this loving community strong. Now, let's continue with the story. Autumn sunlight spilled across the glass towers of Manhattan, turning the skyline into a sea of gold. Inside the 72nd floor of Ward Tech headquarters, Ethan Ward stared out the floor-to-ceiling window, his reflection sharper than the city below. 3 years ago, he'd lost his fiancée in a plane crash on her way to their wedding. Since then, he hadn't believed in fate, in promises, or in love. To the world, Ethan was a symbol of success, a self-made billionaire who built a tech empire before turning 35. But behind that reputation was a man who hadn't smiled in years. His assistant, Marcus Hale, entered quietly holding a tablet, and that careful tone people used around him. "Morning, sir. We've got a situation with the press." Ethan didn't turn around. "Another rumor." "Not this time," Marcus said. "It's about the charity scandal. They're calling you cold-hearted again. The board thinks you should join a new campaign, Hearts for Hope. Public Relations says it'll soften your image." Ethan finally faced him, his eyes cool gray under the soft office light. "You want me to play the billionaire with a conscience?" Marcus hesitated. "Just for a few months. It's good optics." "Optics," Ethan repeated, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. "Since when did pretending fix anything?" Still that afternoon, he signed the papers not out of belief, but because damage control was cheaper than sincerity. 2 days later, his black Tesla glided through Brooklyn, far from his penthouse world of marble and glass. Billboards faded into graffiti cafes, turned into street markets, and the air smelled like roasted peanuts and rain. The car stopped in front of the Hearts for Hope Community Center. The building was old paint peeling, but there was laughter inside. A volunteer greeted him with nervous excitement. "Mr. Ward, we're so honored Lila's with the art kids in Room B." "Lila," he asked, brows slightly raised. "She runs the art program," the woman said. "She's different." "You'll see." Ethan walked through the narrow hallway, his Italian shoes clicking against the worn floor. Children's drawings covered the walls, bright, messy, full of hope. It felt almost offensive in its innocence. When he reached Room B, a young woman stood near a canvas, her jeans splattered with paint, her dark hair tied in a loose bun. She looked up and met his gaze without flinching. There was warmth in her eyes, but not awe. "You must be Mr. Ward," she said, wiping her hands on a rag. "Welcome to a place where people build things that don't crash." Ethan froze for half a second, the word crash hitting harder than she could ever know. She didn't notice. She just smiled and handed a paintbrush to a little boy beside her. For the first time in years, Ethan Ward didn't have a script. He only had a heartbeat, loud, strange, and real. The next morning, the rain had left the streets of Brooklyn glistening. Inside the community center, the faint scent of coffee and acrylic paint filled the halls. Ethan arrived earlier than he meant to. He told himself it was just to observe the project, but deep down he didn't believe that. He found Lila Monroe again, standing by the window, sorting paintbrushes into glass jars. Her sweatshirt was too big, her jeans worn at the knees, and yet she looked completely at ease, a quiet confidence he couldn't define. "Mr. Ward," she said, glancing up, "you're here before the cameras." "I like to see what I'm paying for," he replied dryly. She smiled, not offended, just amused. "Well, in that case, welcome to the art budget where miracles happen on $20 and hope." The kids began to arrive, laughing, dripping rain onto the floor. Lila knelt to greet them by name, helping them hang up their jackets. Ethan stood awkwardly near the door, hands in his pockets, watching her do something he'd forgotten people still did care. When one little girl dropped a paint cup, Ethan instinctively crouched to help. Color splashed across his sleeve. The kids giggled. Lila grinned. "Guess you're part of the art now." For a second, Ethan almost laughed. Almost. Later that afternoon, he followed her to a small cafe across the street. The place smelled like cinnamon rolls and wet pavement. She ordered black coffee, 2 sugars. He ordered espresso, no sugar, no cream. "You don't believe in sweet things, do you?" she teased. He raised an eyebrow. "Sweet things don't last." Her gaze softened. Maybe that's why they're special. Something about the way she said it, calm, honest, like she wasn't trying to impress him, stirred something quiet in him. As she reached for her sketchbook, a small silver bracelet slipped down her wrist, engraved with the initials AM. He noticed but didn't ask. Somehow it felt personal, like a door he wasn't ready to open. Outside, the rain started again, tapping softly on the cafe window. Ethan stared at the drops, wondering how someone with nothing could seem richer than he ever did. And for the first time in years, he didn't check his phone, his stocks, or the time. He just listened to her voice, to the rain, and to the quiet sound of something beginning. 2 weeks later, the Hearts for Hope campaign went public. Billboards, press releases, and interviews, all with Ethan Ward's name on them. But what made the story viral wasn't him. It was her. The photo that spread everywhere showed Lila Monroe kneeling beside a child, paint on her hands, sunlight on her face. The caption read, "The woman who taught a billionaire to care." Ethan hated it. Not the image, but how it made him feel vulnerable, exposed human. At the press conference, reporters asked him about his partnership with Lila. He deflected with polished answers. But when she walked onto the stage, hair tied back, jeans still speckled with paint, the entire room lit up in a way cameras couldn't fake. She wasn't there for fame, and everyone could see it. After the event, Ethan found her outside sitting on the stone steps, sipping from a paper cup. "You didn't mention you were good with the media," he said. "I'm not," she replied. "They just like people who still smile." He sat beside her, the city's noise humming like static in the background. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. "Neither did you," she answered. "But you showed up anyway." He turned toward her. "Don't read too much into that. It's all part of the deal." She studied his face for a moment, then looked away with a small, knowing smile. "Sure, a deal." Her tone was gentle, but something in it made him feel seen, like she understood what even his closest advisors didn't. Over the next few weeks, they were inseparable by contract. Photo shoots, charity visits, and meetings filled their days. Lila moved easily through the chaos, laughing with the children, speaking to reporters, while Ethan stood behind her, hands in his pockets, trying not to feel. But the more time they spent together, the harder it became to stay numb. She noticed things others ignored, the way he clenched his jaw. Before smiling for cameras, how he lingered near the art projects, but never touched them. And one night, when everyone else had left, she asked, "Do you ever make anything that isn't for profit?" He blinked. "What?" "You build companies, number strategies," she said softly. "But do you ever build something just because it matters to you?" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't know how. The next morning, she walked into his Manhattan office, a place of glass and silence, to review campaign edits. Her sneakers squeaked against the marble floor. "Feels like a museum," she said, just colder. He smirked. "It's efficient." She turned to face him. "It's empty." For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Behind him, the skyline glowed in winter light, beautiful but distant. "You really think I'm heartless?" he asked. "I think you're scared," she said. "Of what?" "Of feeling anything real again." Her words landed harder than she realized. For a second, Ethan forgot to breathe. He turned away, pretending to check his phone. She didn't press. She just whispered, "When you're ready to stop running, there'll still be people here." Then she left, leaving the faint smell of paint and rain behind her. That night, Ethan stood by the window of his penthouse, the city lights blurring through the glass. He poured himself a glass of bourbon, but didn't drink it. Her words replayed over and over. "Do you ever make something just because it matters?" He glanced at the untouched sketchbook Lila had left on his desk earlier, a small gift from the kids at the center. On the first page, she had written in looping handwriting, "Art isn't about perfection, it's about proof you were here." He traced the words with his fingertips. For the first time in years, he wondered if all his achievements meant anything at all. Outside, New York pulsed with life. Inside, Ethan Ward, the man who refused to believe in love, was starting to feel the first cracks in his armor. Snow had started to fall over Brooklyn's soft flakes, catching in the yellow streetlight outside the community center. Inside, the walls smelled of cocoa and wet paint. Lila was closing up when the front door opened and Ethan Ward stepped inside. No cameras, no assistants, just a man in a dark coat dusted with snow. "You're here late," she said, surprised. "So are you," he replied, glancing at the rows of art supplies. "I couldn't leave the kids' projects unfinished," she said, stacking sketchpads carefully. He watched her hands move with quiet purpose, so steady, so sure, like she was piecing the world back together, one drawing at a time. When she turned around, he was still standing there, awkward, almost out of place, among the crayons and brushes. "You could have sent an email," she teased. "I tried," he said, "but the words didn't sound right." The lights flickered once, then went out completely. A winter storm had knocked out power across the block. Lila sighed, but smiled anyway. Well, looks like Brooklyn wants us to talk. She found a few candles and lit them, their glow spilling warmth across the cold room. For a moment, the billionaire and the broke artist sat in silence, surrounded by children's drawings and shadows that danced on the walls. Ethan broke the silence first. Why do you do this? Do what? Spend your days here. You could be anywhere doing anything, but you stay. She looked at the candle flame, not at him, because someone once stayed for me. Her tone was soft, like the memory still lived right beneath her ribs. He hesitated. You lost someone too. She nodded. My father. He was a janitor here for 20 years. When he got sick, the community helped us. I guess this is how I repay them, by reminding the next kid that they matter. Ethan leaned back, the words landing deeper than he wanted to admit. For years, he had measured worth in profits and numbers, but hearing her made everything he believed sound hollow. The wind howled outside, shaking the windows like a warning, yet inside the quiet felt almost safe. Lila pulled a folded blanket from a box and set it on the floor. Sit, it's warmer down here. He laughed under his breath. You're serious. She nodded. He hesitated, then followed, loosening his tie for the first time in a long while. They sat side by side on the wooden floor knees, almost touching. Still think this place is a waste of money? She asked. He smiled faintly. Maybe not. Lila picked up a small charcoal pencil. Hold still. What are you doing? Drawing you. In candlelight. It's the best kind. It shows what the light hides. He stayed still as her hand moved lightly over the paper. Her eyes flicked up every few seconds, steady, unbothered by the silence. When she finished, she turned the sketchbook toward him. It wasn't perfect, a few rough lines, the shading uneven, but the eyes looked alive, softer than he'd ever seen himself. That's not me, he said quietly. It is, she replied. Maybe the part you forgot existed. A generator hummed to life, outside lights flickering back on. The moment ended, but something stayed. Ethan stood looking at the drawing once more. Keep it, she said, sliding the paper toward him. He folded it carefully, like something fragile. On his way out, she called after him. Hey, Mr. Ward. He turned. Yeah. She smiled, gentle but sure. You're better when you're not pretending. For the first time, he didn't have a clever answer. He just nodded and stepped into the cold, the paper still warm in his hand. And somewhere between the falling snow and the echo of her voice, Ethan realized that maybe, just maybe, hope wasn't something you bought. It was something you found when you finally stopped running from it. The first snow of February blanketed New York in quiet white. From the penthouse window, Ethan watched flakes drift through the skyline, soft against the cold glass. He hadn't realized how many nights had passed since that candlelit evening in Brooklyn. The sketch Lila drew still sat on his desk edges, curling slightly. He told himself he kept it there as a reminder of the charity, not her, but every morning he caught himself staring at the eyes. They looked alive. They looked free. The Hearts for Hope campaign had exploded online. Lila's face was everywhere, news sites, interviews, even late-night talk shows. She was being called the girl who changed a billionaire. Ethan's PR team loved it. It's perfect, Marcus said one afternoon. The numbers are up. Donations are through the roof. You and Lila, you're a story people believe in. Ethan frowned. People or investors? Marcus smiled the way people do when they know they've already won. Same thing, sir. Something about that answer bothered Ethan. Lila had worked too hard, given too much of herself for this to turn into a marketing stunt. Still, he stayed quiet, a silence he would soon regret. A week later, Ethan arrived at the Brooklyn Center to surprise Lila, but when he stepped through the doors, he felt it immediately, the shift in the air. The kids were quiet volunteers whispering near the office door. Lila stood at the center of it, all eyes wide with disbelief, a printed article trembling in her hands. The headline read, Fake Charity Scandal Leaked Video Shows Lila Monroe Paid to Promote Ward Tech Image. The article claimed she'd accepted money from Ethan's company to play the role of a struggling artist. Attached was a short clip, grainy edited, showing Marcus handing her an envelope in Ethan's office. Lila turned toward him as he entered, hurt, flashing through her voice. Tell me this isn't true. It's not, he said instantly. Someone edited that. Marcus. Marcus, she repeated. That's your man, isn't it? Your company. Your team. Her words were sharp, but her voice cracked near the end. The volunteers began avoiding their eyes. Ethan stepped forward, lowering his voice. Lila, please. You know I don't know anything about you, Ethan, she said softly. I thought I did, but maybe this whole thing was just part of the deal after all. He reached out, but she stepped back. The kids watched from the hallway, faces confused, hurt. "I came here to make a difference," she whispered. "Now everyone thinks I'm a fraud." "Give me time," he said. "I'll fix this." She shook her head. Some things can't be fixed with money. By evening, the video had gone viral. Every news outlet ran the same headline, "The Billionaire and the Bought Heroin." Sponsors pulled out. The community center lost its funding overnight. Reporters swarmed the streets of Brooklyn. Lila disappeared. Ethan fired Marcus, but the damage was done. The scandal had crushed everything, the project, the trust, and whatever fragile bond they had built. That night, he sat in his penthouse, surrounded by silence. The power of the city glittered beneath him, but for the first time, he felt completely powerless. On his desk lay the drawing Lila made, creased, smudged at the corners. He stared at it until the lines blurred. Then, with a shaky hand, he unfolded a letter the Foundation had received that afternoon. Her handwriting was neat, steady, even in heartbreak. "You once asked why I stay where I am. I stay because I believe people can change. I just didn't think I'd have to watch one prove me wrong. No accusations, no anger, just quiet disappointment, the kind that hurt worse than hate." Ethan folded the letter and leaned back in his chair. The city lights glowed on his face, cold, distant, merciless. For the first time in years, the billionaire who didn't believe in love felt something break inside him, something deeper than pride, louder than silence. It was the sound of a heart finally realizing what it had lost. The city below still moved like nothing had happened. Taxis honked, lights blinked, and somewhere people laughed. But 30 floors above the noise, Ethan Ward's world had gone silent. He hadn't been back to the community center. The doors were locked, the sign, Hearts for Hope, taken down, letters still faintly visible against the old brick wall. Lila Monroe had vanished. No interviews, no social media, no trace except for the mural she'd painted on the back wall, a pair of open hands holding a heart made of broken glass. Every night, Ethan drove past that alley just to see it. Sometimes he thought he saw her shadow there, but it was always just the streetlight and the wind. Inside his penthouse, the walls felt too white, too quiet. He had fired Marcus, launched an internal investigation, and donated every cent of the project's profit to local shelters. It didn't matter. No headline cared about the truth anymore. On his desk sat two things. He couldn't bring himself to move the charcoal sketch Lila had drawn, and her short letter folded, worn at the edges. He read it every night, as if the words might change if he stared long enough. "I stay, because I believe people can change." But he hadn't, not soon enough. Days blurred together. He skipped meetings, ignored calls, and let his assistant send polite excuses to investors. He spent hours at the piano in the corner of his living room, a piece of furniture he'd never played. Now the keys were covered in dust and silence. When he pressed one, the sound echoed too loud, like a memory of something soft that had died long ago. One evening, his mother called. He almost didn't answer. When he did, her voice was calm but heavy. "Ethan, you can't undo the past by hiding from it." "I'm not hiding," he said quietly. "Yes, you are," she replied, "and you've been doing it for 3 years. First from grief, now from guilt." He didn't argue. There was nothing left to say. After the call, he walked to the kitchen and poured 2 cups of coffee like he used to every morning when Lila visited. One for himself, one for the space she'd once filled with warmth. Steam curled into the cold air, then disappeared. He whispered into the silence, "I'm sorry." No one answered. A few nights later, a small brown envelope arrived in his mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single Polaroid, a picture of kids painting at the center again. Someone had scrawled across the bottom, "They didn't stop because of you. Don't stop because of them." He didn't need a signature to know who had sent it. For the first time in weeks, he felt something other than guilt. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the faintest spark of hope. He walked to the window and looked out over Manhattan, the city lights shimmering through the winter fog. Somewhere out there, Lila was still painting, still believing in people, still doing what he hadn't been brave enough to do. And in that quiet moment, Ethan Ward, the man who had everything, realized how empty everything could be without someone to share it with. He set down his coffee beside hers, the steam rising like a small prayer. Then he whispered the promise only the city could hear. "I'll find you, Lila, and when I do, I'll be the man you thought I could be." The lights of Manhattan blinked in reply, as if the world itself was giving him a second chance. Spring arrived, quietly softening the edges of winter. The city thawed, but Ethan Ward still carried the cold inside him. He had spent the past 2 months rebuilding what was broken, not his company, but himself. The internal investigation finally revealed the truth. Marcus had taken money from a rival firm, leaking false evidence and manipulating the charity project. The same man who'd managed Ethan's private affairs for years had also arranged travel logistics on the day of the plane crash 3 years ago. Ethan read the report twice, hands trembling. The dots connected like a wound reopening the crash, the cover-up, the reason he'd lost his fiancée, and his faith. The betrayal was deeper than business. It was personal. He went to the press this time without a PR script. Under bright studio lights, he spoke slowly, clearly. "I was wrong," he said. "I let ambition blind me to what truly matters. And because of that, good people were hurt. Lila Monroe was one of them." The confession hit every headline by morning, but for once Ethan didn't care about the noise. He only cared that the truth was out. Then he disappeared from public view again. No interviews, no statements, just silence and a plan. A week later, he showed up at the old community center in Brooklyn. The place was half-empty, paint peeling again, but laughter still echoed faintly from inside. The new director recognized him immediately. "Mr. Ward, I thought you'd never come back." "I'm not here for the cameras," Ethan said softly. He opened his briefcase and placed a single folder on the desk. Inside were legal documents, proof of a new foundation funded entirely by him. "The Monroe Foundation for Art and Hope," he said quietly. "It's in her name. No press, no branding, just funding for art programs across the city." The director blinked speechless. Ethan just nodded, his voice low. "She built this place with her heart. The least I can do is keep it beating." That evening, he found himself walking down the familiar alley behind the center. The mural Lila had painted was still there, the glass heart faded but intact. At the bottom, someone had added a new line of paint. "To heal the world, you start with one person." He touched the rough wall, his fingers brushing over the fresh letters. He knew it was her. Later that night, he checked the foundation's new email account. There was only one message. No subject line, no signature, just a few words. "The kids told me what you did. You didn't have to put my name on it, but thank you for remembering who you are." Ethan exhaled, his shoulders dropping with relief. She hadn't forgiven him, not yet, but she'd seen him try. He replied simply, "It was never about me." Then he closed his laptop and looked out at the city lights. For the first time in years, they didn't feel distant. A few days later, an invitation arrived, a small handwritten card with a splash of blue paint on the corner. "Community Art Night, Brooklyn Center, Saturday 6 p.m. He read it twice before realizing what it meant. She wanted him there. He arrived that weekend without a driver, just another man in a navy jacket carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. When he walked into the gym-turned gallery, his breath caught. Every wall was covered in new paintings by the kids, colorful, hopeful, alive. At the center of it all stood Lila Monroe. She was talking to a group of children, her laughter bright, her hands still stained with paint. For a long moment, Ethan didn't move. He just watched, letting the sight fill the quiet space inside him. When she finally turned and saw him, her eyes softened. She didn't smile, but she didn't turn away either. That was enough. He walked closer, offering the flowers. "For you," he said. She looked at them, then at him. "For the center. For what it gave me," he said. "A reason to start again." Lila hesitated, then took the bouquet. Her voice was soft. "Maybe we both needed that." Outside, the last of the winter snow melted into rain, washing the city clean. And somewhere in that sound, Ethan Ward finally began to forgive himself. The air in Brooklyn had changed. The cold was gone, replaced by the hum of summer street music, laughter, and the smell of roasted corn drifting through open windows. The community center was alive again, its walls freshly painted in bright colors, children's art covering every inch. It was opening night for the Monroe Foundation Art Exhibition, the first of its kind. Hundreds of people filled the gym-turned gallery, reporters, families, artists, and the very kids who'd once painted on cardboard scraps. At the far end of the room, beneath a soft spotlight, stood one painting larger than the rest. A portrait of two hands, one rough, one delicate, holding a heart stitched back together. It was signed, simply LM. Ethan Ward stood in the crowd, quiet, unnoticed. He wore no tailored suit tonight, just a dark shirt, and the same pair of worn shoes he'd once ruined with spilled paint. His eyes lingered on the portrait, and for a moment, he forgot the noise around him. Then he heard her voice, soft, familiar. "You found it," Lila said from behind him. He turned. She looked radiant, not in the glamorous way cameras love, but in the way sunlight loves glass, making everything around it warmer. Her dress was simple pale blue, her hair loose over her shoulders. "I didn't expect you to come," she said. I wasn't sure I should, he admitted, but then I realized this was never about me. She smiled faintly. It never was, but I'm glad you're here. When the lights dimmed, Lila walked to the small stage at the front of the room. The chatter quieted instantly. She took a breath, her hands gripping the microphone. This project started with a promise she began. A promise that no story, no matter how broken, is beyond repair. Tonight isn't about art. It's about proof that even after we fall apart, we can still build something beautiful. Applause filled the room. Ethan felt every word settle deep in his chest. Then her voice softened. There's someone here who reminded me of that. Someone who made mistakes but also made things right in ways that matter more than any apology ever could. Her eyes found him through the crowd. For a heartbeat, everyone else disappeared. I used to think people like him didn't change, she continued. But maybe we're all just waiting for someone to believe we can. The room erupted in applause again, but Ethan couldn't move. It felt like time had slowed, like the city outside had gone silent. When the speeches ended, she stepped down from the stage. He was already there waiting. They walked out to the rooftop together. The air was warm, the sky a soft gray blue with hints of starlight. The city hummed below, restless, alive, forgiving. For a while, neither spoke. Then Lila said quietly, "You never told me why you came back." Ethan looked at her, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "Because I finally understood what you meant," he said. "That day in the cafe, when you said sweet things don't last. You were wrong, Lila. They do. They just take work." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "I'm still not sure I can trust you completely." He nodded. "You don't have to. Just let me earn it." A pause. Then she asked, almost teasing, "So do you believe in love now?" Ethan's lips curved into the smallest, truest smile. "I do, because it's been you all along." She laughed softly, the sound mingling with the city breeze. When he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. The world below continued as always, cars, honking music playing. But up there, under the summer stars, time stood still. And in that stillness, a billionaire who had once stopped believing finally found his heart again. The snow came early that year, dusting the small lakeside town where Ethan and Lila had made their new home. The air smelled like pine and wood smoke, and when the morning light poured through the cabin windows, everything outside shimmered like a dream you didn't want to wake from. Ethan Ward, once the face of Manhattan's billion-dollar world, now wore flannel shirts and learned how to make pancakes without burning them. He still checked his phone out of habit, but most mornings he forgot where he'd left it. Lila Monroe ran her art studio on the edge of town, a wide converted barn filled with children's laughter and the sound of brushes scraping on canvas. The Monroe Foundation had grown beyond Brooklyn funding art programs in 6 cities, but here it was still personal, hands-on, imperfect, real. Sometimes she'd glance through the frosted window and see him chopping firewood. Outside his sleeves rolled his breath, visible in the cold air. It made her smile every time, not because of who he used to be, but because of who he'd become. One quiet Sunday, Ethan set a small box on the breakfast table. Lila was reading by the fire, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside was a simple silver ring. No diamonds, no brand, just smooth metal polished to a faint shine. "It's made from part of the plane's fuselage," he said softly. "I had it melted down, so it could be part of something that didn't end in tragedy." Lila looked up at him, eyes shimmering. "Ethan." He knelt, no grand gesture, no crowd, just 2 people in a cabin where love had quietly rebuilt itself. "I don't need a wedding to prove anything," he said. "I just want to promise I'll keep showing up on the good days and the hard ones." She smiled through her tears, slipping the ring onto her finger. "It's perfect," she whispered. "No headlines, no stage, just us." That night, the fireplace crackled, casting amber light across their faces. Lila rested her head on his shoulder, her hand intertwined with his. Outside, the lake reflected the moon like a mirror. Inside, the world felt smaller, not in the way that limited, but in the way that made everything important fit. Ethan whispered, "I used to think love was something that slowed you down." "And now?" she asked. He smiled. "Now I think it's the only thing that keeps you moving." She laughed softly, pressing her forehead against his. And as the snow fell quietly beyond the window, the man who once measured life in profit and power finally understood what it meant to be rich for real. Morning sunlight poured through the cabin windows, spilling warmth across the wooden floors. Outside, the lake shimmered half-thawed, half-frozen, a mirror of the life Ethan and Lila had built, still healing, still beautiful. Lila stood by the porch watching a group of children paint on easels by the water. It was the first outdoor class of the season. Their laughter carried on the wind bright and full, the kind of sound that makes the world feel new again. Inside, Ethan brewed coffee 2 cups the same way every morning. He added a little cream to hers black for himself, a small ritual, a quiet reminder that love in the end was made of ordinary moments done with care. When he stepped outside, Lila turned and smiled. "Your timing's perfect," she said. "They just finished the mural." He handed her the cup. "What's it called?" She nodded toward the wall of the barn. Across it stretched a massive painting, 2 figures holding a heart stitched together with threads of gold. Below it, the words read, "Hearts for Hope." Ethan stared for a long moment, his chest tightening with something that wasn't pain anymore. It was peace. "I never thought I'd see that name again," he said softly. "It never really left," Lila replied. "Just needed a reason to come back." They stood together in silence, the lake rippling under the soft April wind. Ethan reached for her hand, their fingers fitting together like the last piece of something once broken. Later that evening, the cabin glowed under a sky full of stars. The kids had gone home, the paints were washed, and the quiet felt full, not empty. Ethan sat by the fire, Lila sketching beside him, the sound of pencil on paper blending with the crackle of burning wood. He looked at her, the same girl who once told him that hearts don't need headlines. And he finally understood. All the years he'd spent chasing success, running from grief, trying to buy meaning, none of it had given him what this small life did a reason to stay and someone to stay for. "Do you ever miss the city?" she asked, her eyes still on the paper. "Sometimes," he said. "Then I remember what I found here. And what I almost lost." She smiled gently. "Love." He nodded. "Belief." As the fire dimmed, Lila leaned her head on his shoulder, and the world outside slowed to a heartbeat. Through the window, the stars reflected on the lake, each one flickering like a second chance. Sometimes love doesn't die. It just waits for someone brave enough to believe again. If this story touched your heart, remember real love isn't about wealth or perfection. It's about the courage to begin again when everything feels lost. Subscribe for more stories like Billionaire refused to believe in love until a poor girl proved him wrong. Each tale is a reminder that even the coldest hearts can find their way back to warmth.